The morning bells of Kepler. 442b rang across New Harmony's crystalline domes just as they had for the past 15 years since colonization. Dr. Elena Vasquez walked her daughter Maya to the learning center, their breath forming small clouds in the crisp artificial atmosphere. The 7-year-old chattered excitedly about her upcoming presentation on Earth's extinct butterflies, her small hands gesturing wildly as she described the monarch migration patterns she'd memorized. "Mama, do you think we'll ever see real butterflies?" Maya asked, her dark eyes bright with curiosity. Elena smiled, adjusting her daughter's backpack. "Maybe someday, mija. The restoration projects on Earth are making progress." She watched Maya disappear into the center with her friends, a diverse group of human children whose parents had come from 12 different Earth nations to build something better among the stars. New Harmony was humanity's first truly successful deep space colony, a testament to what they could accomplish when they worked together rather than against each other. Elena had barely reached her laboratory when the sky began to change. The first sign was the birds. Native Keplerian songweavers, delicate creatures with iridescent feathers, suddenly fell silent. Then the electromagnetic readings on her instruments started fluctuating wildly. She stepped outside to see dark shapes descending through the atmosphere, massive vessels that moved with predatory grace, their hulls bearing the crimson sigil of the hegemony. The colony's emergency broadcast crackled to life. All residents remain calm. "Unknown vessels have entered our system. Colonial Defense Force is investigating." But Elena knew what those ships were. Every human in the galaxy knew the hegemony's reputation, even if they'd been fortunate enough to avoid direct contact. The alien empire had conquered over 1,000 worlds through a simple strategy. Identify the strongest resistance, break them publicly and brutally, then rule through the terror of that example. The ships landed in the colony's central plaza with unnecessary force, their engines scorching the carefully cultivated gardens that the colonists had spent years perfecting. Ramps lowered with mechanical precision, revealing the hegemony's enforcers. The Vrex were magnificent in their cruelty. Standing 3 meters tall on powerful legs, their scaled hides gleamed like polished bronze beneath form-fitting armor. Their faces combined reptilian features with something disturbingly humanoid, large, intelligent eyes that could convey complex emotions, making their casual violence all the more disturbing. They moved with the fluid grace of apex predators, each step calculated and efficient. Behind them came the hegemony's true terror weapon, the Dominated. These were members of conquered species fitted with neural crowns that overrode their free will. Elena spotted a Delphic philosopher whose people were known throughout the galaxy for their wisdom and pacifism, now carrying weapons with dead eyes. A Kytherian artist, her 4 arms that once created beauty now modified with surgical precision to inflict pain. A Zenthari healer, his empathic abilities twisted into something that could sense exactly how to maximize suffering. But leading them all was something Elena had only seen in intelligence briefings. A hegemony architect. The being wore robes that seemed to absorb light, its face hidden behind a mask that displayed shifting patterns designed to induce psychological submission. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonic frequencies that made her bones ache. "Citizens of New Harmony," the architect announced, its words broadcast through hijacked communication systems. "Your colony has been selected for integration into the hegemony. Resistance is futile. Submission is inevitable. To demonstrate the futility of opposition, we will now conduct a demonstration of authority." Elena's blood turned to ice. She'd read the reports from other worlds. A demonstration of authority involves selecting individuals for public torture and execution, specifically chosen to break the population's will to resist. The hegemony xenopsychologists were masters of reading social structures and targeting those whose suffering would cause maximum psychological damage to a community. Through her laboratory's windows, she watched the Vrex enforcers systematically scan the colonists who had been forced to gather in the plaza, families huddled together, children clinging to their parents. The Colonial Defense Force had attempted to resist, but their weapons had proved ineffective against hegemony shielding technology. Now their commander, Marcus Chen, lay broken on the ground as an example of military futility. The architect moved through the crowd with predatory patience, occasionally stopping to examine someone more closely. Elena realized with growing horror that it was reading them, not just their physical responses, but somehow analyzing their social connections, their psychological importance to the community. It stopped in front of a learning center. "No," Elena whispered, already running toward the plaza. No, the architect gestured, and Vrex enforcers disappeared into the building. Moments later, they emerged with the children. 12 young humans, ages 5 to 8, their eyes wide with confusion and terror. Maya was among them, still clutching the butterfly drawing she'd been working on for her presentation. "The young," the architect announced, represent hope. Hope represents defiance. Defiance must be corrected? Dr. James Morrison, the colony's lead psychologist, stepped forward with his hands raised. Please, they're just children. If you want to make an example, use me. I helped establish this colony. I'm more valuable to your demonstration. The architect's mask shifted to display what might have been amusement. Your offer has merit, Dr. Cherry. Morrison. But you misunderstand the nature of effective terror. To break the adult, we need not harm the adult. We need only harm what the adult loves most. Elena pushed through the crowd, her heart hammering against her ribs. Take me instead. I'm a xenobiologist. I have knowledge you could use. Please, just let the children go. Other parents joined her plea, offering themselves in trade, but the architect studied them with the detached interest of a scientist examining specimens. It gestured to the dominated Delphic, whose neural crown pulsed with sickly light as he performed some kind of psychological analysis. Fascinating, the architect mused. Your species' attachment to offspring creates predictable vulnerabilities. This emotional weakness will serve our purpose as well. The Vrex arranged the children in a line. Maya looked around desperately until she spotted Elena in the crowd. Despite her terror, the little girl tried to smile and wave as if to reassure her mother that everything would be okay. The demonstration will proceed, the architect announced. Observe carefully. Learn the price of defiance. Understand that submission is mercy. Elena tried to rush forward, but Vrex enforcers blocked her path with casual efficiency. Around her, other parents screamed and pleaded, but the hegemony forces remained unmoved. This was simply another day's work for them. Another world to break, another population to subjugate. The architect approached the first child, a boy named Tommy whose father worked in agricultural systems. The masked figure produced a device that hummed with malevolent energy. Your hope ends here, it said simply. What followed was systematic brutality designed not just to kill, but to shatter the psychological foundations of everyone watching. The architect worked with clinical precision, using hegemony technology to amplify each child's suffering for maximum emotional impact on the adult population. Each death was calculated to break specific psychological defenses, to crush the human spirit through the destruction of innocence. Elena screamed until her throat was raw. She fought against the Vrex, holding her back until her hands were bloody. Around her, the colony's adults wept and begged and threatened and pleaded, but the hegemony was unmoved. This was their method, perfected across 1,000 worlds. Break the children, break the adults. Break the adults, break the world. When they reached Maya, Elena's daughter looked directly at her mother one last time. Even in her terror, the 7-year-old tried to be brave. She held up her butterfly drawing, a bright orange monarch with delicate black lines, wings spread as if ready to take flight. I love you, Mama, Maya whispered. The architect's weapon discharged with a sound like tearing silk. Elena's scream died in her throat. Around her, the plaza fell into stunned silence. Even the songweavers had abandoned their perches, leaving only the mechanical hum of hegemony technology and the soft sobbing of broken parents. Effective, the architect noted, recording data on a handheld device. Human psychological profiles confirmed. Proceed with standard subjugation protocols. This world's resistance has been neutralized. As the Vrex began organizing the colonists into processing groups, Elena remained frozen in place, staring at the small piece of paper that had fluttered from Maya's lifeless hands. The butterfly drawing lay on the scorched ground, its bright colors stark against the dark stone. Something fundamental had broken inside her. Not just grief, though that threatened to consume her entirely. Not just rage, though that burned in her chest like molten metal. Something deeper. Something that connected her not just to Maya, but to every human who had ever lived, ever struggled, ever loved someone enough to die for them. The architect was wrong about human psychology. Love wasn't their weakness. It was their weapon. And across the galaxy, through quantum communication networks and emergency broadcast systems, word of New Harmony's fate began to spread. 12 children murdered in cold blood. 12 futures snuffed out to serve as an example. 12 bright flames extinguished by creatures who saw love as vulnerability rather than strength. The hegemony had made many mistakes in their 3 centuries of conquest. They had underestimated the Catherian resistance, leading to a bloody 5-year war. They had miscalculated Zenthari psychology, resulting in a rebellion that required extensive resources to suppress. They had failed to properly analyze Delphic social structures, allowing pockets of hidden resistance to survive for decades, but all of those errors paled in comparison to their fundamental misunderstanding of humanity. They saw a young species barely a century into space travel with no significant military achievements and a history of internal conflict. They classified humans as a Category 3 threat, advanced enough to be useful, weak enough to be easily controlled. What they failed to recognize was that humanity's history of internal conflict had forged them in fires that no other species had experienced. They were survivors of ice ages and plagues, descendants of beings who had clawed their way to the top of a planet filled with creatures designed to kill them. Their capacity for love was matched only by their capacity for warfare, and their willingness to protect the innocent knew no limits. On New Harmony, Elena Vasquez knelt beside her daughter's broken body and made a promise. Not just to Maya, but to every human child who would come after. The hegemony thought they had broken humanity's spirit. Instead, they had just awakened something that had been sleeping since the species first learned to make fire and defend their young. The hunt was about to begin. The news reached Earth's capital city of Geneva through emergency quantum channels just 14 hours after the massacre. Prime Minister Sarah Okafor was in the middle of a routine budget meeting when her aide burst through the doors, his face pale with shock. "Prime Minister, we have a priority alpha communication from the outer colonies. New Harmony has been attacked." The holographic display activated in the center of the conference room, showing grainy footage from security cameras that had somehow survived the hegemony's electronic warfare. Government officials watched in stunned silence as the events unfolded. The landing of the Crimson ships, the systematic execution of 12 innocent children, the casual cruelty of beings who treated murder as administrative procedure. Foreign Minister Chen Wei was the first to break the silence. "How many survivors?" "Initial reports suggest most of the adult population survived," the aide replied, his voice hollow. "The hegemony's standard protocol appears to be subjugation rather than extermination. They've established processing centers and begun implementing neural compliance technology." Defense Secretary Mikhail Volkov leaned forward, his scarred hands gripping the table. The former Special Forces operator had seen combat on 3 continents, but his face showed the strain of watching children die. "What's our military response capability?" Admiral Santos, head of the Solar Defense Force, pulled up tactical displays. "Our nearest fleet assets are 6 weeks away at maximum burn." The hegemony ships that hit New Harmony are part of a larger force, at least 40 vessels including 3 dreadnoughts. A direct military engagement would be inadvisable. "Inadvisable?" Volkov's voice carried dangerous quiet. "They murdered children, Admiral. Our children. I understand the emotional response, but we need to consider." "No." Prime Minister Okafor's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Admiral Santos, you misunderstand the situation. This isn't about emotional response. This is about survival." She stood and walked to the massive windows overlooking the rebuilt city. Geneva bore scars from the resource wars of the late 21st century, but humanity had rebuilt it stronger than before. The hegemony made a critical error. They studied our history, our psychology, our social structures. But they focused on our conflicts rather than what comes after our conflicts. She turned back to the room. They saw the world wars, the resource wars, the civil conflicts. They saw a species that fights itself and concluded we were weak. What they missed was what happens when we stop fighting each other and start fighting together. Amanda Foster, the government's chief xenopsychologist, accessed her files. The hegemony's conquest pattern is well documented. They select high-value targets for public execution, typically choosing victims whose deaths will create maximum psychological trauma. Their analysis suggests they view human attachment to children as a critical vulnerability. "They're right," Okafor said simply. "It is a vulnerability. But it's also something else." She activated the room's main display, showing a map of human space. 300 colonies spread across 77 star systems connected by quantum communication networks and defended by the largest merchant marine in known space. "Contact every colony administrator, every fleet captain, every mining station, every research outpost," she ordered. "Full disclosure. Show them the footage. Tell them what happened to Maya Vasquez and 11 other children whose only crime was being born human." Admiral Santos looked uncomfortable. "Prime Minister, that could cause panic. Colony populations might demand military protection we can't provide. You're right, we can't protect them all. But we can give them something better than protection." Okafor's eyes were steel. "We can give them purpose." The next 72 hours saw humanity transform in ways that terrified their alien neighbors and confused xenopsychologists throughout the galaxy. Rather than fragmenting in panic or demanding governmental protection, human colonies began organizing themselves with military efficiency. On Proxima Station, mining supervisor Jack Torres received the news while overseeing titanium extraction operations. His crew, hardened asteroid miners from 6 different Earth nations, listened to the broadcast in complete silence. When it finished, Torres simply said, "Shift's over. We've got work to do." Within 6 hours, they had converted their mining lasers into weapons, their ore haulers into military transports, and their fusion reactors into potential warheads. The message they sent to Earth was brief. Proxima miners ready for orders. We're coming for them. Similar transformations occurred across human space. Agricultural colonies retrofitted their crop dusters into fighter craft. Research stations converted their laboratories into weapons development facilities. Merchant vessels began installing military-grade shielding and armament packages that violated dozens of interstellar treaties. The response wasn't coordinated by any central authority. It was organic, instinctive, driven by something deeper than government policy or military doctrine. Word of the massacre spread through human social networks like wildfire, carrying with it images of Maya Vasquez's butterfly drawing and the faces of 11 other children who would never grow up. Captain Maria Santos of the merchant vessel Esperanza was docked at Tau Ceti Station when the news broke. Her ship was a converted cargo hauler carrying medical supplies to Outer Rim colonies. She was in the middle of negotiating delivery schedules when her communications officer, a young man named David Park, stumbled onto the bridge with tears streaming down his face. "Captain, you need to see this." Santos watched the New Harmony footage 3 times before speaking. "How many other ships are in port?" 17 human vessels, ma'am. Mixed types, cargo haulers, passenger liners, a couple of survey ships. Contact their captains. Emergency meeting in Cargo Bay 7, 1 hour. The meeting lasted 15 minutes. Santos showed the footage, explained what had happened, and asked a single question. "Who's with me?" All 17 captains volunteered immediately. They called it the Merchant Marine War Council, and within days it had grown from 17 ships to over 300. Cargo haulers became troop transports, passenger liners became mobile command centers, survey ships became reconnaissance scouts. The transformation was ad hoc, improvised, held together by fury and determination rather than military protocol. But it was effective. Dr. Foster had been right about human psychology, but only partially. Yes, humans formed strong emotional attachments to their young. Yes, threats to children could paralyze them with protective instincts, but she had missed the other side of the equation. What happened when those protective instincts had no legitimate target to protect? When humans couldn't save their children, they avenged them. The phenomenon spread beyond the colonies to Earth itself. Major cities saw spontaneous demonstrations demanding military action. Veterans organizations began organizing volunteer units. Defense contractors started working around the clock, not for government contracts, but simply because their workers refused to go home while those bastards were still alive. Prime Minister Okafor found herself dealing with a situation no government in human history had faced. A population that was demanding the right to go to war. "The polls are unprecedented," her chief of staff reported during their morning briefing. 93% approval for military action against the hegemony. Not just military action, total warfare. "The focus groups are asking why we haven't already launched nuclear strikes. Because nuclear strikes won't work against their shielding technology," Admiral Santos replied. "And because we need intelligence before we can act effectively." Okafor studied the latest reports from human colonies. What about the merchant marine fleet? Growing daily, they're calling themselves the Butterfly Fleet now, after the girl's drawing. Completely irregular, no central command structure, but they're achieving remarkable coordination through social media networks and quantum communication. Are they effective?" Santos hesitated. "They shouldn't be. Their ships are converted civilian vessels. Their weapons are improvised. Their tactics are unconventional. But they're starting to achieve results. The first success came at Kepler 438c, where a hegemony patrol squadron had established a monitoring post. The Butterfly Fleet attacked with 23 converted cargo haulers, led by Captain Torres and his Proxima miners. They should have been slaughtered. Instead, they won decisively. The hegemony forces were expecting conventional military engagement, organized fleet movements, predictable tactics, rational risk assessment. What they encountered was controlled chaos. Mining ships that used their cargo holds to launch clouds of metallic debris, disrupting targeting systems. Survey vessels that used their scientific sensors to identify weak points in hegemony shielding. Passenger liners that served as mobile repair facilities, keeping damaged ships in the fight far longer than should have been possible. But the real shock came when the hegemony tried to use their standard psychological warfare techniques. They broadcast images of human prisoners being tortured, expecting the attacking fleet to withdraw rather than risk civilian casualties. The human response was not what they expected. "This is Captain Torres to hegemony forces," came the transmission. "We've seen what you do to children. We know what you are." There will be no negotiation, no mercy, no quarter given or asked. The mining lasers that followed turned the hegemony monitoring post into expanding clouds of superheated gas. News of the victory spread through human space within hours. The Butterfly fleet had proven that the hegemony could be beaten, that their technology wasn't invincible, that their psychology was fundamentally flawed when applied to humans. More importantly, they had learned something about hegemony technology that would prove crucial in the days to come. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now serving as a technical advisor to the Butterfly fleet, analyzed the battle recordings from her cramped quarters aboard Captain Santos's ship. The neural crown technology that allowed the hegemony to control conquered populations had a weakness. It required constant quantum entanglement with central processing nodes. "If we can identify and destroy their command and infrastructure," she reported to the fleet commanders, "we can free every dominated soldier they're using. Turn their own weapons against them." The implications were staggering. The hegemony's military strength wasn't just their technology. It was their ability to use conquered populations as expendable troops. If humans could break that control system, they could potentially trigger uprisings across dozens of subjugated worlds. But first, they needed to find the hegemony's main fleet. The answer came from an unexpected source. Captain Morrison, the child psychologist from New Harmony who had tried to save the children, managed to escape from the hegemony processing center with crucial intelligence. His message, transmitted through coded quantum burst, was brief but devastating. "Preparing final assault on Earth. Neural crown production facilities identified. Architectural command ship located. Maya's drawing recovered from architect's quarters. They're keeping trophies. Come quickly. They're planning to make Earth their next demonstration." The message reached Earth just as the Butterfly fleet was approaching from the outer rim. Prime Minister Okafor stood in the Situation Room watching tactical displays that showed over 800 improvised warships converging on human space. "Admiral Santos, what's your assessment? Militarily? This is insane. We're facing a fleet that has conquered 1,000 worlds with converted cargo ships and mining equipment. Our improvised tactics worked against patrol squadrons, but their main fleet will be prepared for us now. And personally?" Santos looked at the display showing the faces of the 12 murdered children. "Those bastards picked the wrong species to mess with." The Butterfly fleet began its final approach to the Vega system. Each ship carrying improvised weapons, desperate crews, and the fury of an entire species that had finally found something worth dying for. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing technology centuries beyond their own. But they had something the hegemony had never encountered in 300 years of conquest. They were fighting not just for victory, but for vengeance. And humanity had been perfecting the art of vengeance since they first learned to hold grudges and make fire. The final battle for human independence was about to begin, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Vega system blazed with the assembled might of the hegemony's 13th Conquest Fleet. 47 capital ships hung in perfect formation around the system's primary star, their crimson hulls drinking in the stellar radiation and converting it to power for their devastating weapon systems. Each vessel was a monument to calculated brutality, designed not just to destroy but to inspire surrender through sheer intimidation. At the fleet's center, the Architect's command ship Dominion's Edge stretched 3 kilometers from bow to stern. Its surface was covered with neural crown production facilities, psychological warfare laboratories, and trophy chambers where artifacts from conquered worlds were displayed as symbols of hegemony supremacy. In one such chamber, Maya Vasquez's butterfly drawing was mounted in a place of honor. The architect had found the child's final act of defiance somehow amusing. Supreme Architect Vexehai stood on the command bridge, its mask displaying patterns of satisfaction as it reviewed the fleet's readiness reports. The human colony of New Harmony had provided valuable psychological data, confirming that the species could be controlled through their attachment to offspring. Earth would fall within days, its population processed and neural crowned for service to the hegemony. "Status of human military response?" Vexai inquired, its harmonically modified voice causing nearby Vrex officers to shiver in reflexive submission. Commander Kralthex, a veteran of 17 conquest campaigns, consulted his tactical displays. Long-range sensors detect approximately 800 human vessels approaching from multiple vectors. Analysis confirms they are converted civilian ships with improvised weaponry. No significant military threat detected. Curious. Most species either surrender immediately or attempt formal military engagement. This irregularity suggests either desperation or fundamental psychological miscalculation on our part. Shall we deploy the demonstration fleet to crush their approach? HFY considered the question while reviewing the psychological profiles his analysts had compiled. Human behavior remained puzzling. Their response to the New Harmony demonstration had been completely contrary to predictions. Instead of surrendering, they had become more aggressive. Instead of seeking protection, they had sought revenge. No, we will allow them to approach. Their defeat will serve as the final demonstration before Earth's subjugation. Record everything. The sight of their pathetic fleet being destroyed will break any remaining resistance. What the hegemony couldn't detect from their long-range sensors was the true nature of the approaching human force. The Butterfly fleet had spent weeks traveling through hyperspace, and they had used that time well. In the converted cargo holds of mining ships, technicians worked around the clock building weapons from blueprints shared across the quantum network. Agricultural specialists had developed bioweapons specifically targeted at hegemony neural crown technology. Scientists from a dozen colonies collaborated on projects that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. Captain Torres, now serving as one of the fleet's irregular commanders, stood on the bridge of his converted mining ship, New Harmony's Revenge. Around him, his crew worked with the focused intensity of people who had already accepted death as the likely outcome of their mission. "Status report, David," he called to his communications officer. "All fleet elements report ready, Captain. We've got confirmation from Dr. Vasquez that the neural crown jammers are operational. Captain Santos reports that the medical ships are prepared for refugee processing. The demolition teams are standing by with the planetary crackers." Torres nodded grimly. The planetary crackers were a desperate measure. Mining charges powerful enough to shatter small moons, now configured as ship-killing weapons. They would only get one shot with them, but one shot might be enough. What about the dominated soldiers? Liberation protocols are loaded and ready for transmission. If Dr. Vasquez is right about the neural crown vulnerabilities, we should be able to free most of them once we take out the command ships. The plan was insane by any conventional military standard. Instead of engaging the hegemony fleet directly, the humans intended to punch through their defensive perimeter and attack the neural crown production facilities. If they could broadcast the liberation protocols while simultaneously jamming the control signals, they might be able to turn the hegemony's own slaves against them. It was the kind of strategy that could only work once, against an enemy that had never faced it before. The hegemony's tactical computers were programmed to counter conventional military threats, not a swarm of improvised ships piloted by civilians who had nothing left to lose. "Approaching weapons range," reported the sensor operator, a young woman whose parents had died in the resource wars. "Hegemony fleet is maintaining formation. No defensive movements detected." Torres keyed the fleet communication system. "All ships, this is New Harmony's Revenge. You know why we're here. You know what they did. Maya Vasquez was 7 years old. She wanted to be a xenobiologist like her mother. She drew butterflies because she thought they were beautiful." His voice carried across 800 ships, reaching crews who had left behind everything they knew to join this final desperate gamble. "Today we show the galaxy what happens when you murder human children. Today we teach the hegemony that some species don't break, they burn. All ships, weapons free. For the children. For the children," came the response. From 800 captains and 50,000 crew members who had crossed half the galaxy for the right to die fighting. The battle began with a display of arrogance that would be studied by military historians for centuries to come. The hegemony allowed the human fleet to approach within weapons range before opening fire, confident that their demonstration of technological supremacy would crush human morale. Their first salvo was devastating. Energy beams designed to crack planetary crusts tore through converted cargo ships like they were made of paper. 12 human vessels died in the opening seconds, their crews vaporized before they could even scream. But instead of breaking, the human fleet did something unprecedented in hegemony experience. They accelerated. Mining ships built to operate in asteroid fields maneuvered with suicidal precision, using their industrial-grade thrusters to dodge between energy beams that could annihilate cities. Agricultural vessels released clouds of modified spores that interfered with hegemony targeting systems. Survey ships used their scientific sensors to identify weak points in alien shields and transmitted targeting data across the fleet. The hegemony's tactical computers struggled to process what they were seeing. The human fleet wasn't following any recognizable combat doctrine. Ships would break off attacks to rescue damaged vessels, then return to combat with apparent disregard for tactical disadvantage. Cargo haulers would use their loading equipment to physically grab smaller hegemony ships and drag them into range of improvised weapons. Analysis, Vex's High demanded, watching the chaotic battle unfold on the main display. Commander Kraltex consulted his instruments with growing confusion. Unknown, Supreme Architect. Human tactical behavior does not match any recorded patterns. They appear to be improvising in real time. Impossible. Combat requires coordination, planning, tactical doctrine. Yes, Supreme Architect, but they appear to be coordinating through their communication networks, sharing targeting data and tactical innovations as the battle progresses. Each engagement teaches them something new about our capabilities. Vex High's mask displayed patterns of concern. The human fleet was dying. Nearly a quarter of their ships had been destroyed, but they were learning faster than they were being killed. Worse, they were achieving their apparent objective of penetrating toward the fleet's center. Deploy the dominated squadrons. Crush this rebellion before it spreads. The response was immediate. 300 ships crewed by conquered alien species moved to intercept the human advance. Delphic wisdom guided their tactics. Cytherian artistry made their formations beautiful and deadly. Zentari empathy allowed them to predict human movements with supernatural precision. But as the dominated forces engaged, something unexpected happened. Human ships began broadcasting on multiple frequencies simultaneously, their signals somehow penetrating the neural crown control networks. Dr. Vasquez's liberation protocols, refined through weeks of analysis, struck at the fundamental weakness of hegemony control technology. The first dominated ship to break free was a Delphic cruiser whose crew suddenly remembered what freedom felt like. Instead of continuing their attack run, they turned their weapons on the nearest hegemony vessel. The neural crowns that had enslaved them for decades flickered and died, leaving behind beings who had every reason to hate their former masters. Impossible. Vex High's harmonics cracked with rage and disbelief. The neural crowns are quantum entangled. They cannot be disrupted. Supreme Architect, Kraltex reported, his own voice showing strain. The humans appear to have developed some form of quantum interference technology. Multiple dominated units are breaking free of control protocols. The battle transformed from an orderly demonstration of hegemony power into something approaching chaos. Freed dominated vessels turned on their former controllers with the fury of the long enslaved. Human ships pressed their advantage, broadcasting liberation signals while their improvised weapons tore into hegemony formations. But the real shock came when Captain Santos, driving a converted passenger liner through a gap in the hegemony defensive line, managed to reach the Neural Crown production facilities aboard the Dominion's Edge. This is for Maya, she transmitted as her ship's modified mining lasers began cutting through the command ship's hull. The liberation signal that followed was amplified through the hegemony's own communication networks. Across the Vega system, across dozens of nearby star systems, neural crowns failed simultaneously. Conquered populations that had served the hegemony for centuries suddenly found themselves free for the first time in generations. The psychological impact on the hegemony forces was immediate and devastating. Their entire military doctrine was based on using enslaved populations as expendable troops. Without the dominated, they were just another technologically advanced species facing an enemy that refused to surrender. Vex High stared at the tactical displays in shock. In 30 minutes of combat, 3 centuries of hegemony expansion had begun to crumble. Rebellions were erupting on dozens of conquered worlds. The dominated fleets were turning on their former masters. The human ships, though still vastly outnumbered, were fighting with a coordination and determination that defied every psychological model in the hegemony database. Supreme Architect, came an urgent communication from the fleet's analytical division. We're receiving reports from across the sector. The liberation signal has propagated through our quantum networks. Estimated 47 worlds are experiencing active rebellion. Hegemony authority is collapsing. For the first time in its long career, Vex High experienced something approaching fear. Not fear of death, that was merely a tactical consideration, but fear of failure on a scale that would reshape galactic politics. All units, full retreat. We must preserve the fleet to... The transmission was cut short as Captain Torres's mining ship, damaged but still functional, completed its final approach to the Dominion's Edge. The planetary cracker in its cargo hold detonated against the command ship's reactor core. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. When the light faded, the hegemony's 13th Conquest fleet was scattered debris and expanding gas clouds. Of the 47 ships that had entered the Vega system, only 3 escaped to hyperspace. The Butterfly fleet had lost over 200 vessels, but they had achieved something unprecedented in galactic history. They had broken the hegemony. In the aftermath of the battle, as rescue ships searched for survivors among the wreckage, Captain Santos found herself aboard a captured hegemony vessel searching through the trophy chambers. She found Maya's butterfly drawing exactly where intelligence reports had indicated, mounted on a wall alongside artifacts from dozens of other conquered worlds. As she carefully removed the small piece of paper, she noticed something that made her smile despite the tears running down her face. Maya had written something on the back of the drawing, words that no one had noticed during the massacre. Butterflies don't stay in their cocoons forever. Love, Maya. The 7-year-old had been right. The cocoon was broken, and something beautiful and terrible had emerged. A humanity that had learned what it was truly capable of when its children were threatened. The hegemony's 300-year reign of terror was ending, and across the galaxy, conquered species were looking up at the stars with hope for the first time in generations. The humans had shown them that even the greatest tyranny could be broken by those willing to risk everything for love. But the war was far from over. The hegemony's core worlds remained untouched, and their leaders would not accept defeat quietly. The real test of humanity's newfound strength was yet to come. The hegemony core worlds had never known defeat. For 800 years, the 7 star systems around the ancient red giant Mortanus Prime had served as the beating heart of the galaxy's most successful empire. Their planets were monuments to conquest, vast cities built from the treasures of 1,000 worlds, powered by the labor of countless enslaved species, protected by fortress fleets that had never faced a serious challenge. That was before they received word of Vega. Grand Supreme Architect Zekmeral stood in the Council of Dominion, its form hidden beneath robes that seemed to devour light itself. Around the obsidian table sat the other Supreme Architects, beings whose names were spoken in whispers on conquered worlds, whose decisions had shaped the fate of entire star systems. Today, for the first time in living memory, those beings looked afraid. "Explain," Zekmeral commanded, its harmonically enhanced voice causing the chamber's crystal pillars to resonate with sympathetic vibrations. "How does a fleet of converted cargo ships destroy the 13th Conquest Force?" Architect Veltaran, responsible for psychological warfare doctrine, shifted uncomfortably in its ceremonial restraints. The humans employed tactics outside established parameters. They demonstrated willingness to accept catastrophic casualties in pursuit of strategic objectives. Most significantly, they developed countermeasures for neural crown technology. Impossible. The neural crowns are based on quantum entanglement principles that predate most species' understanding of basic physics. Nevertheless, the evidence is conclusive. 47 worlds have experienced simultaneous uprising events. Dominated populations are breaking free of control protocols across 3 galactic sectors. The rebellion is spreading faster than our suppression forces can respond. Grand Supreme Architect Zekmeral processed this information with the cold calculation that had made it the most feared being in known space. The hegemony's power was built on a simple foundation: the absolute control of conquered populations through neural crown technology. If that control could be broken, their entire empire was vulnerable. What is the status of the human homeworld? Earth remains undefended. Our intelligence indicates their entire military capacity was committed to the Vega engagement. The world is protected only by local defense platforms and the remainder of their solar defense force, perhaps 50 vessels total. Then we respond with overwhelming force, assemble the 1st, 2nd, and 5th Corps fleets. We will demonstrate that the Vega victory was an anomaly, not a pattern. Earth will burn as an example to any species that dares to follow human tactics. But even as the order was given, Zekmeral felt something it had not experienced in centuries of conquest: doubt. The humans had displayed capabilities that challenged fundamental assumptions about galactic warfare. Their improvised fleet had achieved tactical coordination without centralized command structure. Their crews had fought with a dedication that approached fanaticism. Most disturbing, they had turned the hegemony's greatest weapon, the neural crowns, into a vulnerability. Across human space, word of the Vega victory spread like wildfire through quantum communication networks. On Earth, spontaneous celebrations erupted in major cities as people realized that the seemingly invincible hegemony could be beaten. But in government buildings and military command centers, the mood was far more somber. Prime Minister Okafor stood in the Situation Room, reviewing intelligence reports that painted a terrifying picture of the coming response. "How long do we have?" Admiral Santos consulted her tactical displays. 3 weeks, maybe 4. The hegemony core fleets are massive. each one larger than our entire remaining space navy. When they arrive, Earth will face approximately 1,500 capital ships equipped with weapons capable of sterilizing planetary surfaces. What about the colonies? The surviving elements of the Butterfly fleet are scattered across a dozen systems, conducting rescue operations and coordinating with newly liberated worlds. They can't return in time to defend Earth, and honestly, after Vega, we don't have enough ships left to mount effective resistance. Defense Secretary Volkov leaned forward, his scarred hands tracing patterns on the table. Then we need to change the nature of the fight. Dr. Foster, still processing psychological profiles from the Vega engagement, looked up from her data tablets. What do you mean? The hegemony expects us to defend Earth conventionally. Orbital platforms, fleet engagement, last stands in major cities, but we've already proven that conventional thinking doesn't work against them. Okafor nodded slowly. What are you proposing? We don't defend Earth, we weaponize it. The plan that emerged from 48 hours of desperate brainstorming was either brilliant or insane, depending on perspective. Instead of fighting a defensive battle they couldn't win, humanity would turn their homeworld into the galaxy's largest trap. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now serving as technical advisor to the Earth Defense Council, worked around the clock to refine the Neurocrown liberation technology. Her daughter's death had transformed her from a mild-mannered xenobiologist into one of the galaxy's foremost experts on hegemony control systems. The quantum disruption field can be amplified through Earth's magnetic field, she explained to a room full of military commanders and government officials. If we can build enough transmission stations and coordinate their activation, we can create a planetary-scale liberation signal that will free every dominated soldier in the approaching fleets simultaneously. How many transmission stations? Admiral Santos asked. At least 50, positioned at specific magnetic field intersections. Each one needs to be powered by a fusion reactor and protected by defensive installations that can survive orbital bombardment. Construction time? 3 weeks if we strip resources from every non-essential project on the planet. Okafor made the decision without hesitation. Do it, requisition, whatever you need. But the liberation signal was only half the plan. The other half was even more audacious. Captain Maria Santos, having survived the Vega engagement, had returned to Earth with a proposal that made seasoned military commanders pale with shock. We invite them down. Explain, Volkov demanded. The hegemony's strength is their technology and their ability to control conquered populations. But they've never fought a ground campaign against a species that refuses to surrender. Earth has 4 billion people, most of whom are now trained in basic combat skills thanks to the civil defense programs. Our cities are hardened against orbital bombardment thanks to the Resource War's infrastructure, and we have one advantage they can't counter. Which is, we know the terrain, and we don't care if we die fighting for it. The proposal was simple in concept, terrifying in execution. Instead of trying to stop the hegemony fleets in space, Earth would allow them to land occupation forces. But those forces would find themselves fighting not a demoralized population ready to surrender, but 4 billion humans who had been systematically trained, armed, and organized for guerrilla warfare. Every major city became a fortress. Civilians were evacuated to underground shelters that had been expanded into vast networks of tunnels and supply depots. Military units dispersed into small mobile teams equipped with weapons designed specifically to counter hegemony technology. Most importantly, the entire planet became a transmission station for the Neurocrown liberation signal. The hegemony core fleets arrived exactly on schedule, their massive forms blotting out the stars as they assumed orbital positions around Earth. Grand Supreme Architect Zekmeral had chosen to lead the assault personally, determined to crush the human rebellion with overwhelming force. Status report, it commanded from the bridge of the dreadnought Eternal Dominion. All fleets report ready for orbital bombardment. Preliminary scans indicate the human population has retreated to underground installations. Estimated 4 billion targets remain on world. Curious. Most species evacuate their homeworld when facing certain defeat. Shall we proceed with sterilization protocols? Zekmeral considered the question while studying tactical displays. The complete destruction of Earth would certainly send a message to other species, but it would also eliminate the psychological advantage of forcing a surrender. A conquered Earth, with its population neural-crowned and serving the hegemony, would be a much more powerful symbol. No. Deploy occupation forces. We will take this world intact and process its population for service. Let the galaxy watch as humanity kneels before hegemony authority. The invasion began with a display of force designed to shatter human morale. Massive landing ships descended through Earth's atmosphere, their hulls glowing with re-entry heat as they delivered Vrex assault troops and dominated soldiers to strategic locations. The sight should have driven the human population to despair. Instead, it triggered the activation of 50 neural crown transmission stations simultaneously. The liberation signal that erupted from Earth's magnetic field was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Amplified by planetary-scale infrastructure and broadcast through quantum networks, it reached every dominated soldier in the hegemony fleets within seconds of activation. The effect was immediate and catastrophic for the hegemony forces. 60,000 dominated soldiers suddenly remembered who they had been before the neural crowns destroyed their free will. Delphic philosophers, Catherian artists, Zenthar healers, representatives of dozens of conquered species, all finding themselves armed and surrounded by the beings who had enslaved them. The mutiny that followed was swift and brutal. Dominated troops turned on their Vrex commanders with centuries of suppressed rage. Ships that should have been providing orbital fire support became battlegrounds as freed crews fought to take control of their own vessels. But Grand Supreme Architect Zek Morale had not survived 8 centuries of conquest without contingency plans. Even as the dominated forces rebelled, backup control systems activated, attempting to reassert neural crown authority through secondary quantum channels. "Deploy the Pure Vrex battalions," Zek Morale commanded. "Begin planetary suppression bombardment. If we cannot control the dominated, we will proceed without them." The Pure Vrex were elite troops who served the hegemony by choice rather than compulsion, fanatics who believed in hegemony supremacy with religious fervor. They landed on Earth expecting to face a broken population ready to surrender. What they found instead was hell. The Battle of New York lasted 18 hours and became legendary throughout human space. Vrex assault troops equipped with energy weapons and powered armor found themselves fighting street by street against human civilians who used improvised weapons, knowledge of urban terrain, and suicidal determination to extract a terrible price for every block. Children who should have been in school threw homemade explosives from apartment windows. Elderly citizens who had lived through the resource wars used their knowledge of urban warfare to turn subway systems into death traps. Ordinary people became extraordinary fighters when defending their home. The Vrex were magnificent warriors, but they had never faced an entire population willing to die rather than surrender. For every human they killed, 10 more took their place. For every building they captured, the humans collapsed it on their heads. For every victory they achieved, they paid with casualties that would have broken the morale of any rational military force. Similar battles erupted across Earth's major cities. London, Tokyo, Lagos, Sao Paulo, each became a furnace that consumed hegemony forces faster than they could be replaced. The orbital bombardment that was supposed to break human resistance instead drove them deeper underground, where they continued fighting with the desperate fury of beings defending their young. But the real shock came when Dr. Vasquez activated the secondary phase of the liberation signal. Instead of just freeing dominated soldiers, the enhanced transmission began broadcasting across interstellar distances, carrying the Neural Crown liberation technology to every world in the hegemony's empire. The effect was galactic in scope. On conquered worlds throughout known space, Neural Crowns failed simultaneously. Populations that had been enslaved for centuries suddenly found themselves free to choose their own destiny. And their choice was unanimous: rebellion. Grand Supreme Architect Zek Morale watched its empire crumble from the bridge of the Eternal Dominion. Communication networks carried desperate reports from across hegemony space. Core worlds were under siege by their own slave populations. Fleet commanders were requesting permission to abandon conquest operations and return to defend their home systems. Supreme Architect, reported its tactical officer, were receiving surrender offers from 17 core fleet commanders. They're requesting permission to negotiate with human forces. Impossible. The hegemony does not surrender. Supreme Architect, our casualty reports indicate we've lost 60% of our occupation forces. Human resistance is not decreasing despite massive casualties. Meanwhile, rebellions on 43 core worlds are threatening our industrial capacity. Zek Morale stared at the tactical displays showing Earth's continents. Each major population center glowed with the fires of battle, but the fighting continued with undiminished intensity. The humans were dying in enormous numbers, but they refused to break. What manner of species, it asked quietly, chooses extinction over submission? The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Vasquez, broadcasting from somewhere beneath the rubble of Geneva, sent a message that reached every hegemony ship in orbit. "This is Dr. Elena Vasquez, speaking for Earth and all humanity. You want to know what kind of species we are? We're the kind that remembers a 7-year-old girl named Maya who drew butterflies because she thought they were beautiful. We're the kind that turns love into vengeance and grief into strength. You thought you could break us by killing our children. Instead, you taught us what we're truly capable of when we have nothing left to lose. The transmission included images that would haunt hegemony commanders for generations. Humans fighting impossible odds with improvised weapons, civilians shielding wounded soldiers with their own bodies, children drawing pictures of butterflies on bunker walls while explosions shook the earth above. You ruled by fear for 800 years, Vasquez continued, but you never understood that there are things more powerful than fear. Love, the promise that someday our children will live in a galaxy where species like you can never hurt them again. The final phase of the liberation signal activated as she spoke, broadcasting not just the technology to break neural crowns, but the complete psychological profile of human resistance, the proof that some species could not be conquered, could not be broken, could not be made to kneel no matter what horrors were inflicted upon them. Across the galaxy, conquered species looked at the human example and found their own courage. If a young species barely a century into space travel could bring down the mighty hegemony, then freedom was possible for anyone willing to fight for it. The rebellion that had begun with the death of 12 children had become a galactic revolution, and its end would reshape the balance of power among the stars forever. 6 months after the Battle of Earth, Grand Supreme Architect Zek Moral knelt in chains before the Galactic Liberation Council. The being that had once commanded the fear of 1,000 worlds now faced judgment from representatives of the species it had enslaved, with humanity holding the position of honor at the center of the tribunal. The trial was held on Kepler 442b, in the rebuilt plaza where 12 children had died. Maya Vasquez's butterfly drawing, carefully preserved and restored, had become the symbol of the new galactic order, a reminder that beauty and innocence could triumph over calculated cruelty. Dr. Elena Vasquez, now serving as Earth's representative to the Council, stood before the assembled delegates. Around her sat beings from dozens of worlds, Delphic philosophers whose wisdom had been perverted into service of tyranny, Kytherian artists whose creativity had been channeled into instruments of war, Zenthari healers whose empathy had been weaponized to maximize suffering. All of them were free now, their neural crowns broken, their worlds liberated by the cascade of rebellions that had swept across the galaxy in the wake of humanity's desperate stand. The defendant stands accused of crimes against consciousness, Elena announced, her voice carrying clearly through translation systems that allowed every species present to understand. 800 years of systematic oppression, the enslavement of 67 species, the murder of countless innocents in service of an empire built on fear and submission. Zek Moral's mask had been removed for the trial, revealing features that combined elements from multiple species, the result of genetic modifications designed to enhance its psychological impact on conquered populations. Without its technological enhancements, it seemed smaller, almost pathetic in its ceremonial restraints. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Elena asked. When Zak Merrill spoke, its voice was no longer enhanced with harmonic frequencies designed to induce submission. It sounded almost ordinary. Defense? Your species has destroyed everything we built. Our empire, our order, our vision of galactic peace through unified control. You speak of crimes, but what crime is greater than chaos? What cruelty exceeds the anarchy you have unleashed? A murmur of anger ran through the assembled delegates, but Elena raised her hand for silence. You call it peace. We call it slavery. You call it order. We call it oppression. But let's talk about the real crime, the one that started this war. The main display activated, showing holographic images that had been burned into the memory of every human in the galaxy. 12 children, arranged in a line in this very plaza. Maya Vasquez holding her butterfly drawing, the architect's weapon discharging. A 7-year-old girl dying because her existence was inconvenient to an empire built on fear. Their names were Maya Vasquez, Tommy Chen, Sarah Morrison, David Park, Lisa Santos, Michael Kim, Anna Volkov, James Foster, Maria Rodriguez, Kevin Jones, Amanda Brown, and Christopher Taylor. They were children. They were innocent. And you murdered them to make a point about power. Zek Merrill's expression remained unchanged. They were strategic targets. Their elimination served the greater purpose of preventing prolonged resistance and unnecessary casualties. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the translation system seemed to pause, as if the technology itself was struggling to process such casual dismissal of innocent life. Strategic targets? Elena repeated slowly. 7-year-old Maya wanted to be a xenobiologist. She drew pictures of butterflies because she thought they were beautiful. Tommy Chen collected rocks from 12 different worlds. Sarah Morrison was learning to play the violin. She gestured to the display, which now showed images of the children at play, learning, laughing with their families. These were your strategic targets. Children whose greatest threat to your empire was the possibility that they might grow up free. Captain Torres, now serving as military liaison to the Council, stepped forward. The defendant's actions violated every principle of civilized warfare. The targeting of children is considered a crime against consciousness by every species represented here, including the Vrex. Indeed, several Vrex officers had provided crucial testimony against their former leaders. The warrior species had a complex honor code that specifically protected the young of all species. The hegemony's systematic use of child murder as a terror weapon had ultimately turned many Vrex against their own government. Architect Vel Taran, former head of psychological warfare, spoke from the witness stand. Its neural crown had been removed months ago, and the process of remembering its pre-enslavement identity had been traumatic but ultimately liberating. The human psychological profile was unique, it admitted. Most species display predictable responses to the targeting of offspring. Initial rage followed by submission when faced with overwhelming force. The humans demonstrated the rage phase but never progressed to submission. Instead, they transformed their protective instincts into offensive capabilities. Explain. They weaponized love. Their emotional attachment to their young, which we identified as a vulnerability, became the source of their strength. Each casualty increased their determination rather than breaking their morale. It was unprecedented. The trial continued for 3 days, with witness after witness describing the hegemony's crimes across the galaxy. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. The survivors of New Harmony, including Dr. Morrison, the child psychologist who had tried to save the children. I offered myself in trade, he said simply. I thought I could save them by appealing to rational self-interest, but there was no rationality in what happened that day. Only calculated cruelty designed to break the human spirit. He looked directly at Zek Morale. What you didn't understand was that humans don't break the way other species do. When you destroy what we love most, we don't surrender. We become dangerous. The evidence was overwhelming. Not just the massacre at New Harmony, but 8 centuries of similar atrocities across dozens of worlds. The systematic use of terror to maintain control. The neural crown technology that had turned conquered populations into slaves. The trophy chambers where artifacts from murdered cultures were displayed as symbols of hegemony supremacy. But perhaps the most damning evidence was the hegemony's own records, recovered from captured ships and installations. Clinical reports that described the murder of children as morale disruption operations. Psychological profiles that analyzed the most effective ways to inflict emotional trauma on conquered populations. Strategic plans that treated genocide as a routine administrative procedure. When the evidence phase concluded, Elena stood to deliver the prosecution's closing statement. The defendant wants us to believe that the hegemony represented order, peace, unity. But order built on oppression is not peace. It's the silence of the grave. Unity achieved through enslavement is not cooperation. It's the uniformity of death. She gestured to the assembled delegates, beings from dozens of species who had survived the hegemony's rule and lived to see freedom. Look around this chamber. See the diversity of life that the hegemony tried to crush into uniformity. Delphic wisdom, Catherian artistry, Zenthari compassion. These are treasures that enrich our galaxy. The hegemony saw them as threats to be eliminated or tools to be exploited. Elena picked up Maya's butterfly drawing, its colors still bright despite everything it had witnessed. My daughter drew this picture because she found beauty in the idea of transformation, a caterpillar entering a cocoon and emerging as something capable of flight. She never got to see her own transformation, but in a way, she triggered the transformation of our entire galaxy. She looked directly at Zek Morale. You thought you were killing a child. You were actually killing the old order. You thought you were demonstrating power. You were actually revealing weakness. Because true strength doesn't come from the ability to destroy. It comes from the willingness to protect. The verdict was unanimous. Zek Morale and the surviving hegemony leadership were found guilty of crimes against consciousness, sentenced to life imprisonment on a remote world where they would live under the same conditions they had imposed on their victims. No technology, no comfort, no power over others. But the trial was only the beginning. The real challenge was building something better from the ashes of the hegemony. The Galactic Liberation Council evolved into the Free Species Alliance, a voluntary confederation based on mutual cooperation rather than enforced unity. Each member world maintained its sovereignty while contributing to shared projects like exploration, scientific research, and mutual defense. Humanity found itself in the unexpected position of leadership, not through conquest, but through example. Their willingness to sacrifice everything for freedom had inspired the galaxy-wide rebellion that brought down the hegemony. Now their experience with democracy, individual rights, and voluntary cooperation provided a model for the new order, but perhaps the most important change was philosophical. The galaxy had learned that some values were worth dying for, that freedom was not something to be granted by authorities, but something to be claimed by those brave enough to fight for it. Dr. Elena Vasquez established the Maya Vasquez Institute for Galactic Ethics on the site of the old learning center where her daughter had attended school. Its mission was simple: to ensure that future generations would never again face the choice between slavery and death. The Institute's symbol was a butterfly, wings spread wide, ready for flight, beautiful and free. 10 years after the Battle of Earth, Elena stood in her office at the Institute, reading reports from research teams scattered across the galaxy. Former hegemony worlds were rebuilding their cultures, rediscovering traditions that had been suppressed for centuries. New species were making contact with the Alliance, drawn by stories of the Great Rebellion that had liberated the galaxy. A chime indicated an incoming message. Elena activated the holographic display to find Captain Santos, now Admiral Santos, calling from the exploration vessel New Harmony. Dr. Vasquez, we've made contact with a previously unknown species in the Outer Rim. The Quellians. They've been hiding from galactic civilization for over 1,000 years, terrified of attracting the hegemony's attention. What's their status? Peaceful, technologically advanced, but traumatized by centuries of isolation. They want to know if it's really true, if the galaxy is finally free. Elena smiled, looking out her window at the plaza where children now played safely, where species from dozens of worlds worked together on projects their ancestors could never have imagined. Tell them it's true, Admiral. The galaxy belongs to the free now. She ended the transmission and walked to the memorial wall, where 12 names were carved in stone beneath Maya's butterfly drawing. Sometimes late at night, she could almost hear her daughter's voice on the wind, asking about those butterflies she'd wanted to see. They're everywhere now, Mija, Elena whispered. The whole galaxy is full of butterflies. Above Earth, construction continued on the memorial station, a massive installation that served multiple purposes. Part museum, part research facility, part memorial to those who had died for freedom. It was humanity's gift to the galaxy, a reminder of the price of liberty and the cost of tyranny. Its central chamber housed the most important artifact from the war, Maya Vasquez's butterfly drawing, preserved behind quantum shielding that would keep it safe for millennia to come. Beside it, a simple inscription in 100 languages. They ruled by fear for 800 years. A 7-year-old girl with a drawing of butterflies brought them down? Remember her. Remember them all. Never again. The hegemony had believed that power came from the ability to inspire fear, to break the will of others, to reduce entire species to cowering slaves. They had built an empire on the simple principle that might makes right, that the strong naturally dominate the weak, but they had made one critical error in their calculations. They had mistaken love for weakness, compassion for vulnerability, hope for naivety. They never understood that love, when threatened, becomes ferocity. That compassion, when betrayed, becomes justice. That hope, when challenged, becomes unbreakable determination. Maya Vasquez had wanted to study the butterflies of Earth, to learn about transformation and beauty and the miracle of flight. She never got the chance to become a xenobiologist, never got to see the butterflies she dreamed about. But in dying, she had triggered a transformation more profound than anything in her biology textbooks. She had shown the galaxy that even the mightiest tyranny could be brought down by beings who refused to let fear extinguish love. The hegemony had ruled through terror for 8 centuries. A child with a butterfly drawing had ended their reign in less than a year. And across the galaxy, on worlds that had been slaves for generations beyond memory, children now drew pictures of butterflies and dreamed of flying free among the stars, knowing that freedom was not a gift to be granted, but a birthright to be claimed. The age of fear was over. The age of butterflies had begun. In the words that became the Alliance Charter, inscribed in every language spoken among the stars, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all conscious beings are created equal, that they are endowed by their existence with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that when any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. The hegemony had forgotten that lesson. Maya Vasquez, in her brief 7 years of life, had helped the galaxy remember it, and in remembering, they had become free.